Hey guys, if you have not watched part 1 to this episode, I'm going to have you pause right there and go back and make sure you catch part 1 of this episode, because it really does build up this conversation to help you kind of understand some of the things to just be aware of when it comes to men's emotional intelligence. Listen to our expert speaker, Dr. Byndloss, and how he has navigated his own emotional intelligence, just some of the historical factors that's come up for him, and the work that he is doing and why. And so I don't want you to miss some of the things that build up to the conversation we're going into. But this is part 2, so thank you for joining us. If you have not subscribed, go ahead and just hit that right click. Like the video, share your comments. We're always welcome for your comments. And thank you again for coming back and joining us. We are in part 2. So I can't help but think about this, because this is the conversation we're having. We're talking about how you're almost conditioned to be one way, and then there's a journey for a lot of times men to get to emotional intimacy, emotional maturity, I would even say. But like, what would you say is kind of like the explanation into how emotional intimacy is connected to men's mental health, and what do you feel like are the consequences if they don't, they don't access that, they don't work on that?
For sure. I mean, I think, I tell people a lot of times the byproduct of all of this is depression and anxiety. So
Mhm.
I'm not a big fan of like giving people diagnoses and those types of things, but I'm a bigger fan of understanding kind of where those things come from. And part of what we're talking about is like there's a dissonance that gets created, right? The you inside is not congruent with the you outside, and it creates this rub. And yeah, it'll create conflict in relationships and those types of things. But when it comes to that context of mental health, really the byproduct of like internalized dissonance is depression or anxiety, right? Is this constant worry and fear about like what's going to happen next? Can I do this? Can I be there? Can I, right? A lot of that comes from that rub. Or it is the sense of like low mood, anhedonia, lethargy, worthlessness, hopelessness that we see in depression that also comes from like, damn, I know I want to be this, but I can't be this because, XYZ, right? And so I think that that's
Yeah.
like one of the bigger connected links to like, I mean, and let's be real, depression and anxiety is probably like the number 1 and 2 interchangeable things that bring people to seek mental health treatment anyway,
Yep.
right? Most
And a
people,
lot of the diagnoses are like their core is some version of those too.
for
So
sure,
that's
for
what.
sure. And so I do think like living life incongruous is probably like the biggest issue for a lot of people and a lot of men, right? I also think that like keep in mind it becomes a really kind of like slippery slope because of the need to be tough or the need to be angry or strong or something like that, right? Depression and anxiety are both now incongruous with this archetype of who you have to be. Right? So it's like the double whammy now, right? Not only am I not feeling my emotions and I'm pushing away and I'm not this emotional person that's in touch with my emotions, but then as a byproduct, I'm having depression and anxiety, but I can't say nothing about that either because then
Mm.
I'm gonna be weak again too. You know what I mean? And it becomes a very difficult cycle. And so part of my proposal to a lot of people is that we do more of like upstream interventions instead of these downstream interventions. Most of the time, mental health treatment is reactive instead of proactive, right? So people will come into treatment and say, I got to fix this depression and anxiety, right? And, there's a lot of theoretical orientations that say, okay, these are the things that we're going to do to fix the depression and anxiety, right? But in my world, I don't practice that way, right? I say, where's it coming from? Right? Let's
Yep.
look upstream and see what's polluting the water. Like what's dead in the river that's polluting the water. And so, you know, a lot of times if we can have these conversations with people in our lives about like emotional vulnerability, emotional intelligence, all those other pieces, we can actually prevent some of that depression and anxiety from happening. But once again, moreover, most of the time people are like, I'm not touching that because that's scary, that's fearful. We'll talk about like the impact of it now, especially as the stigma of mental health is a little decreased in our society now. It's a little bit more okay for people to be depressed and anxious. right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, to some extent, I mean, there are people that will diagnosis seeking, right? That are seeking a stigmatization so that they can have something to wear on their sleeve. You know what I mean? They can have a
Right.
patch, right? And so a lot of people will come in because of that stuff, right? But I think, yeah, the byproduct of a lot of this stuff is still going to be that depression and that anxiety, that horrible sense, or the destructiveness and the anger, which once again still kind of goes hand in hand with the depression and anxiety as well.
Yeah. I love that you said, I am not just going to fix this mode. I really want to understand what's happening underneath. I think when people are in those like cognitive dissonance spaces, sometimes it can lead to these like neurotic ways of interacting with the world and where you just kind of feel stuck, but you find yourself like placing that frustration or anger on just these random little things that's like, yeah, I can fix that, but that's not why you're mad at that, right? Or why you're like, in this cycle of that being a problem in your life all the time. It's something deeper than that. And until we address that, you're just gonna move around that into different things. Are there positive role models for exemplifying emotional intimacy, and how can men learn from that?
I mean, I would imagine there's positive role models all the time, right?
Yeah,
But like there's you know, I just I live my life through metaphor, and because I live my life through metaphor, I see the world through metaphor. I think of hip hop all the time, right? But we all need an Uncle Phil, right? That's how it works. I don't know specifically. I mean, rest in peace, Uncle Phil, right? But like, I don't know specifically if everyone has the Uncle Phil, right? But when I talk to people about those things, that's kind of like what it looks like, right? You think of even the narrative and the story of Fresh Prince, right? You think of what it was, right? He was a rich, successful, emotionally available husband and father that then came into the world to this little. I mean, I'm not gonna sing the song to you because we all know it, right? West Philadelphia, born and raised, you know what I mean? But like
right,
that then becomes like the archetype that we're looking at. That becomes the type of people that we see. And I'm sure that there's those people everywhere, right? I'm sure that there are mentors, there are role models. I'll be totally honest with you, like even in whatever weird chaos like Will Smith goes through, I got respect for the journey that he goes through though, right? Like he's not just pushing stuff off to the side now. He's struggling with the fact that I'm in an entanglement, right? So however you feel about that
right,
phrase, you know what I mean? However
right.
you feel about that word, he's still sitting with his feelings and being open. You know, my dude, he caught a lot of flack by sitting on that couch and listening to his wife tell him about all of the things that she was doing and everything else. And once, like, I'm not gonna go team one side or the other, right? But like, part of what it was like, oh wow, I see you like being vulnerable, right? I see you maybe being a little too vulnerable, right? But I still see you being vulnerable in that space. And so I don't know. I don't know if there's like a specific person that I would put out there. I think more of it is just concept or an idea, right? And the idea
Yeah,
is about those people that are actually willing to be uncomfortable, that are actually willing to have that like ego wounding of, what it means to tell someone that you truly love them, I love them, I love you. You know what I mean? And I'm sure that when we think about those people in our lives, I'm sure that we all have either one person or like pieces of a person that we can start to kind of like mush together and say, well, these are the
it's the
traits, these
same.
are the things that we're looking for. So
Yeah, I like to look at everybody has some kind of value or strength. And so I like that last piece you said, because I'm like, wait, if I just took all they like strengths and made this like super person, that is like the person. But what helps me
there's a
navigate relationships.
oh, so I was going to say there's a really good book that I just finished reading. It's by I'm like you. If it's not in front of me, I don't remember the name of it, but it's by a brother named Eddie Glaude Jr. Right, and it is about this idea of he's a like a Cornell West protege and all those other things. But there's he puts forth the idea of like, instead of waiting for the hero to come, right, we need to actually internalize these pieces of those heroes within. And he talks about like the Martin Luther Kings and the Malcolm X's and the John Lewises and the Ella Bakers and all of these people. And he's like, no, it's not just about me waiting for Martin to come save me and help me be that person. It's about me like thinking about, damn, what did Martin have? And what part of that is inside of me? How can I actually take on that? That's the concept that I think that you're putting forth.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Gravitating towards the positive messages and the images and the things that you may not have in your life, or a person in your life that can give you those. Maybe you do, but it's just in that small piece. But being able to gravitate towards that, whether it's a physical, real person in your life or a person that existed in some way, or you could see in some way or connect to in some way, to be able to learn and grow from, because sometimes you don't have like that Uncle Phil, as you mentioned, to just like take you in, remove you from the environment, and just really hold on to you and never give up on you.
For sure.
But if you kind of like look at the different things around you, the resources, you may have like pieces of that Uncle Phil, and then you just kind of have to put them together and maximize using. I don't
For
like to
sure.
say using, but like benefiting from those relationships in those ways so that you can continue to grow.
For sure.
Because it's usually somebody in some way is trying to help. They may not. I think it was the show David Makes Man that was on OWN. He was in South Florida and just a high crime, high poverty area. And his mentor was a drug dealer, like a main drug dealer, but he gave him like a lot of wisdom. And so sometimes it's not packaged up in the best way, but if that is the way you're going to be able to grow and learn, don't ignore it, don't turn away from it, because there may be something in there that you need, and that's going to like just help you get to that next level. He was like, don't do what I'm doing, stay away from this completely. Right. Also, you kind of see that I don't have anybody around me, like father wasn't there, all of these different things to just guide me in that way that looks picture perfect sometime on TV.
For sure.
And I would thank you for sharing that quote. I would love to, get that quote. Thank you.
Well,
What do you feel like are some steps that can be taken to reduce the stigma around men expressing their emotions and seeking a deeper connection for their own emotional intimacy?
it's a good question. I think I don't think that there's like, I tend to shy away from the like, hey, just do this type of like responses.
Right.
But I still am a huge fan of this self-reflection or self-reflective space. Right? So even people that I work with or that I don't work with that I just know, always, always encouraging people to journal, to reflect, to talk to their elders, understand like your own biography, right? Like write your autobiography so you can actually give a narrative to like, damn, this is how I got here. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And moving yourself is like this theory of change place, right? So you're moving yourself. You're probably not in that action phase yet, right? But like, how do
Yeah.
I talk to people to get them into that contemplation or even that planning phase to make some type of change? And a lot of times people are always feeling the depression, the anxiety, the kind of rub of like the lack of emotional intimacy. But the first steps is about being able to be reflective on you and like, how do you come
Yeah.
through? Once again, it's not necessarily a systemic thing, and from the beginning it's always an individual thing, and it has to start with the individual. And so,
Yeah.
you as an individual, how are you preparing yourself to go through? How are you reflecting so you can know this is, I would love it if guys that would come into therapy with me would come in and say, here's my phrase, right? Here's my phrase. The world is the world is a horrible place, so I gotta be big and bad. Or like, everybody's gonna take it. I would love if people could have that type of insight, right?
Hmm.
Unfortunately, it's like it's the end of every 90s gangbanger, menace to society movie, right? I don't know if you're I mean, it's the Society 90 Boys in the Hood type thing, right?
I saw all of that.
And, I mean, at the end of the day, right? Like, there's always that phrase, Kane at the end says, I did too much to go forward, I did too much to go back, right? I hate when people have to come in at that point.
Yeah,
You know,
I do too. It's
I
like so
hate when
much to
people have,
unpackage.
yeah, I hate when people come in at the end when Doughboy and them is sitting on the stoop after they kill Ricky. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? Talking about either they don't
the
know, they
damage
don't
is so
show, they
deep.
just don't care, right? And so part of it has to be that, like, you've got to be able to have that narrative already, right? And even if you don't seek therapy, just the insight of that narrative is something that actually gets people moving in an way of kind of like self-understanding and self-exploration. I think the scariest part for a lot of people is that they don't have a narrative to understand what they're feeling, right? Once again, like we started getting, right? They feel the feelings because the feelings aren't, just because you don't acknowledge them doesn't mean that the feelings aren't there, right? But then you don't have a way to understand or contextualize those feelings. Then it becomes really, really difficult. If you can start to develop those ways of contextualizing them, once again, we do that through self-reflection, understanding the narrative, understanding, the genealogy and the intergenerational patterns of like manhood that you've come up before, right? Like I said before, like one of the things that is super helpful for me is understanding that like my dad grew up without a dad. You know what I mean? And I'm like, so it makes sense that I'm not that great at this right now. Because it's not like I got generation after generation after generation that's it. No, Pops just figured it out and he gave it the old college try, right? And
Yeah,
so of course now I can understand why, I get really frustrated or I get really fearful when my son does something really stupid and I blow up.
truly.
I'm not blowing up because I'm angry at him. I'm blowing up because I'm terrified. Because I'm like, oh my gosh, you need to understand the world that you're in right now. It doesn't care about how you this and that. You know what I mean? And so it's about being able to create that narrative. So,
How did you like if you could simply just explain how you explain reflection? How do you explain reflection, like the self-reflection or self-reflective process?
I mean, I think it's nuanced once again, right? But I think there are so many different ways. I told you because of my background, because of my training, because of my own life experience, for me, the self-reflection process is always a narrative. Like it's always a story.
That's what I
You know
was
what I mean?
thinking. Yeah.
It's always a story. It's always like, how do I tell myself the story and gain insight and understanding from the story that I'm telling?
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And so,
Yeah.
like I said, I love, my favorite hip hop artist is Nas, right? Because it's a wonderful storyteller, right? He can sit down and tell me a story from beginning to end. There's even a song where the brother told me a story backwards. You know what I mean? And I'm like, I
Wait a
got you.
minute.
Yeah, but it's about being able to sit down and tell a story. For other people, it may be reflecting and getting reflection from other people, from people that you do trust, right? This is where I love the fact that black men have good black men around them. You know what I mean? Because the fact is that like we all have a whole bunch of like ain't shit homeboys, and then we always got that one that's always gonna tell us how it is, right? And being able to come up and have that one that can say it, and I think this is where I think you mentioned at the beginning of like the advantage of me being a black man in therapy is that like I kind of, because of my own struggle, I kind of understand the landmines that are there when it's about reflecting on who you are and doing those things. And so when I give you that
Yeah.
feedback, I'm probably going to give you that feedback in the way that I would have wanted to hear it, or in the way that I know
Yeah.
that I need to hear it, in a way that's not, pathologizing, in a way that's not emasculating, in a way that is, in the words, sounds, and feelings that you may reflect. And so I think that that's also another really good way of self-reflection. Or
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's legitimately just being conscious of like, what am I going through? Right. And stop and recognizing when we're distorting that reality, when we're making up a story in order to mask how we're feeling or whatever it is. It's definitely a difficult but yet nuanced thing for everybody.
I like that. yours goes into narrative, because it's a story behind it, which to me changes the story when you can put the story behind it. Because it, like you said, see, like you can understand your dad more, have this compassion and this empathy for him as a father because you sought to understand his story,
for sure.
and it helps you understand your story as a result. I know when I tell people, I'm like, the first thing I say, I was like, step one and reflection is you got to blame yourself. I'm like, I know that sounds sometimes confusing because sometimes it's you know it's not your fault, but it's like your goal is to grow in some way, right? Or to evolve in some way. And the only way you can do that is if you assign some kind of accountability to yourself. So that makes so much sense with that, with the healing process, especially when we kind of talk about a lot of the reason why men and Black men specifically are in these spaces where they may lack sometimes emotional intimacy is because of, things that they were not even aware of or just kind of set up to push them in different directions. So you don't live in this space of, well, this is the only reason why, and I have no control over it, right? Like, how do I show up in a way that I can see how I maybe feed that narrative and how I can be active in adjusting that for myself, or evolving that for myself. So I like that the narrative being the outcome or the goal with self reflection. So we talk a lot about like how Black men show up in emotional intimacy, but how do other cultures approach male emotional intimacy, and what might be ways that we can learn from them?
So that's so funny. My wife is Brazilian, right? So she's
Mm.
born and raised in Brazil, and she always part of like my learning curve and helping me understand my own emotions was watching her go through hers, right? And I don't know if what you know about Brazilian culture, but like they wear their emotions on their sleeve. They cry at everything. And so like she is a very like emotionally outgoing person. And part of it was like, okay, I need to be okay with her emotions, right? But the other part was like, damn, am I really that like detached and distant from my emotions? And she always she has this phrase that she tells me. She's like, sometimes you just gotta cry it out. Like sometimes it's not about me like feeling bad or something like that. Like something will happen and that's just the way that I process that emotion. And she says like Americans are emotionally constipated, right?
Yeah.
You've got to get it
Yeah.
out. You've got to get it through, right? And like I said, it's understandable about like why there's these different cultural spaces and why we live in a very kind of like capitalistic, you know,
Hmm.
but also there's like sociological stratuses where we're divided by socioeconomic status, but we're also divided by race. We're also divided by gender, sexuality, religion, right? There's all of these big, huge divisions when in a lot of other countries, there's not as much stratification, right? There's not as
Yeah.
much divisiveness and division, right? And so, this idea of like us as Americans, we find so many ways to make ourselves outgrouped, right? Where we're the other, right? There's so many ways where we can be put out that it's like, oh wow, we're just super vulnerable at this space, right? When we start talking about some of the more collectivistic societies, one of some of the more, like I said, being in Brazil and going to Brazil and experiencing that culture a lot of times, yes, there is a huge racism issue in Brazil. Like that's not what I'm talking about. There's a huge, for sure. The difference between social class and skin color is like there's more than just a correlation. We'll put it like that.
Mm.
Most of most poor people are people who are of African descent, right? You got to remember, like
Oh, wow.
80% of the African diaspora actually went to Brazil, not to the US. So you have places like Bahia and Salvador that are like the biggest population of African descendants outside of Africa in the world. You know what I mean?
Oh, wow.
But the bigger piece is collectivistically, a lot of people stick together, right? Because
Mhm.
social economic stratus, like we talk about the one percenters here, Man, go around the world and look at what 1% truly looks like, and look at the huge chasm between the rich and the poor. There's no middle class, right? So then what
Yeah.
happens
Oh, wow.
is that we have this more collectivistic society. There's not as much outgrouping possibilities, right? So we have the ability to be a little bit more vulnerable with each other because we're all kind of in the same pot. When here, there's a huge piece of like, no, I won't step on you and step on me, right? Like there's the American dream of being able to come from nothing and something is a great
Yeah.
idea, but the American dream is always at the expense of something else, right? Or someone else. You know what I mean? It's the catch 22, right? And so when I
Yeah.
think about like cultural pieces, it is more about inclusivity, right? It is more about connectedness and feeling connected with people and those types of things. I think in that context, I do think it is an environment to the or outside in type of uh, understanding, right? So like the idea is that the environment is more open to emotional vulnerability, right? Go to a Brazilian soccer. Go look. The World Cup is coming up next year. All you got to
Oh,
do,
yeah.
yeah, all you got to do is watch the national anthems of all of these countries, and it will tell you a ton about how emotionally available and connected those people are, right?
Hmm. That's a
Watch,
interesting.
just
Okay.
watch. The Olympics is coming up in a couple of weeks, right? It
Mhm.
is a very similar presentation of like, you know, I've never seen people so connected as I have at a Brazilian soccer game, right?
Wow.
120,000 people in a stadium, and it's like, no, we're all together. In America, we don't have
Mhm.
that, right? We don't.
Mhm.
There's not that much pride
Football.
around. I mean, you talk about America, right? But like
Right.
even football, because football is not an international sport, we're segregated between like, you know, you can't be a Raiders fan and a Steelers fan, right? Like
Got you.
we hate
Oh,
each
yeah, so it's not like the American football support versus yeah, it's
yeah,
like the
it's
regions
like
and the
it's the regions. It's the are you from, you know, are you from Detroit? Okay, well if you're from Detroit, then you can't mess with Chicago, right? Like it's those types of contexts. But I think
the Lions are always the best, even though they've never won a Super Bowl.
I but I do think it is important to look at like what the environmental effect is on people's willingness and ability to be uh, emotionally available, and does the
Mhm.
environment actually support it, right? And I think that the thing that we take from that is the same thing that I try to take now and what I'm creating here in my own family, in my practice, in my social group is like, no, I'm going to normalize this now, right? Like, we're going to create a different environment about what it looks like and what it means. Like, you know, my son is, oh, it's okay to cry. Go ahead, cry now, bro.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about those feelings, right? Amongst
Oh,
my friends know that I'm going to say the hard thing, right? That I'm going to say the thing that like probably hits them in the gut that they don't want to hear, that they want to be blah, blah, blah. When you're like, man, I can't stand that girl. She did blah, blah, blah. And they know that I'm going to be the one that's going to look at her, love that girl. Like, what are you
yeah.
talking about?
Right.
She don't love you back and you're hurt. You know, there is a great song. Once again, we're back into hip hop again. It's called "The Pain" by Rhapsody. Rhapsody is one of
Okay.
my favorite hip hop artists, let alone like female MCs. But like
Mhm.
the song is all about pain and about
Mhm.
accepting and acknowledging the pain, right? And in the beginning, there's like I don't know where they got it from, but there's a sample, and the guy comes in and he's like, you hurt, you mushy. That girl got you mushy and you hurt." And then she goes in and
Yeah.
talks about the pain, right? And she kind of talks about all the situations that we see in society that cause us pain, not just men, but women and all the rest of it. And normalizing that, like, hey, we all have pain. You know what I mean? And so I think like the more that we have those things, those are the lessons that we learn from some of these other cultures of like, there has to be a cultural ideology of like, it's okay to do those things. And,
Yeah.
you know, how do we do that? We make sure that we all have some kind of common ground collectiveness.
Yeah. My goodness. I imagine that, um, you speak about the just connectedness of different cultures. I actually see that here in the Bay Area now, where like the Asian and Indian communities here are very much like connected and like are consistent in how they show up in different spaces or the practices they do for the most part, right? Like there's like some outliers, but and it's so interesting because I'll like join, my community groups online or whatever, and I'll see a whole separate group for the same community that's just for Indians or just for, and so I'm like, yeah, they kind of be like real, connected in their own messaging and their own like problem solving. And that's something that I think, I could tell that that's not consistent in the Black community for sure, and just throughout America in different ways. It's a lot of,
Yeah,
like you said, division and disconnectedness, and like it's almost like embrace, like yeah, do your own thing, separate from this. It,
yeah.
I guess not to be cliche, but together we're stronger type thing is broken down when we're that level of dividedness is existing,
Well, I
and I
mean,
imagine.
you
Go
got.
ahead.
I don't want to sound like Kendra Burris, but like blame it on slavery, right? You're also
For
talking
sure.
about cohorts of people who voluntarily immigrated to the United States with the goal of having a better life, right? Unfortunately, when we talk about like the ramifications of like slavery and those types of things, right? Like we weren't brought over here to have a better life. Like we were brought over
Right.
here systematically segregated from, not just each other or not just the rest of society, but even each other, right? I mean,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
The light skin versus dark skin debate,
The North
are
versus the
you a
South.
Luther
Yep.
guy or are you a Shalimar guy? Like, what are we talking about here, right? Like we've always been, part of once again, we talk about like the societal impact on those things. No, society was set to keep slaves enslaved, not for
Yeah.
them to come together and create unity and all those other things. And you look throughout history, we've been the most successful when we've been able to come together and create unity, right? As a kid growing up in the Bay Area, I grew up in the remnants of the Panther Party, right? Where everyone was my brother, everyone was my sister, it was a community, right? Each one teach one, the WIC programs, those were those things that happened. What happened was they were systematically kind of like dismantled, right? In
That's so
order
true.
to have those things. And so, yeah, we do look at some of those cultures that voluntarily come over, but then there's always that impact of like we wasn't the archetype of the US wasn't to keep us like this, right? It wasn't for us to kind of like live the American dream. Once again, the American dream was always to
I
exploit
mean, we were what to
exploit
build the American dream for them, not for
the,
us.
the
Yeah.
American dream was built on the backs of slaves. That's how it works.
Yeah.
But I do
I'm
think you
glad
bring
you
up a
spoke to
really
that.
valid point there, though, right? Like I do think that the more connectedness that you do have in those communities, the more you can create those types of connectedness, right? So that's why I really appreciate a lot of the things that I see. I mean, I haven't been in the Bay Area since 20. I mean, lived in the Bay Area for a while, but even here in Nashville, I do appreciate a lot of the things that I do see of like, there's a Black wellness collective and a Black Nashville Black Farmers Market Collective where they promote Black businesses and everyone gets together and kind of like collectively tries to solve these problems. Like I
Yeah.
do appreciate a lot of those
Yeah.
things. I do think
I do too.
it
Yeah.
creates that that collectiveness or that collectiveness that actually allows us to then have the environment to harbor more positive functioning, to harbor emotional vulnerability, to harbor those types of things instead of kind of what we see now. Right?
Yeah. I really appreciate that you went into the history a little bit because sometimes when people only see like these are the conditions of today and without context it do sound a little bit
For sure.
concerning, but with context there is way more. That's a way different story, right? Like you said, it's not a lot of people's understanding of Black history is it goes back to slavery and then before that somewhere in Africa, like and that's it, or somewhere else, like, and then there's
Mhm.
conflicts with that, like, where actually did we come from and where were we at first, or that kind of thing. And so, but when you have like rich history, traditions, you have those stories passed down, you have that sense of empowerment, strength, like, generationally connected throughout the years and centuries. It forms a different kind of ideal about who you are, your strength, your power, your goals in that within those communities. And I feel like you said, we definitely create spaces, and I love that because it does feel connected. I feel connected when I go into spaces that's created for Black people,
Mhm.
and so I do like that progress in that way. And it's always been there, but to your point, in that history, it is intentionally sabotaged by systems that are put in place just to dismantle those over and over again. And
For sure.
that's like unfortunate because it makes it hard to really thrive in those areas when you got systems constantly working against you.
Mhm. For sure.
That was huge. Speaking of that, like, I imagine that social media does not make it easy for men to really embrace emotional intimacy when there's so much just out there in
Mhm.
that space, in dating apps, all of that. How do you feel like they can form and maintain emotional intimate relationship when you have so many different audiences and messages coming at like, tradition, society, men in all of these different ways?
Remember earlier when I told you I'm so glad I'm not growing up in this time of
Yeah.
Bianca, a big social media person. I'm not a social media fan. I think that social media becomes like the antithesis of the conversation that you and I just had for the last like 10 minutes, right, about connectedness. I do think that it's a false sense of connectedness. There is this fantastic, so I'm a big Neil deGrasse Tyson fan. You know who that is? The astrophysicist. So he's
No.
a brother. He's a brother that's the head of the Hayden Planetarium. But he's an astrophysicist. But his whole thing that he does is he like is always challenging like people's pseudoscience. And so Terrence Howard went on Joe Rogan podcast the other day and basically just slandered him because Terrence Howard is Terrence Howard and he's a very unique person for whatever it is. And Terrence Howard basically wrote a 36-page treatise about how math is wrong. And yeah.
Oh,
and he reached out to one of the society's like foremost intellectuals in Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he basically said, "Here's my treatise. Tell me what you think." And Neil deGrasse Tyson, the true scientist, did exactly what a peer reviewer should do. He broke it down piece by piece and said, "Here's how I challenge this. Here's where you misunderstand this thing. Here's where you do that. And here's where you do this, and blah blah blah." And he used this phrase. I will have to hold on. I will have to look it up because I sent it to someone the other day.
okay.
It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And it is where people know a little bit about something and it increases their own perception of the knowledge that they truly actually have about that situation, right? And
Yikes.
it
That
goes
sounds
in this
dangerous.
and it goes in this weird path, right? So like people who know a little bit about something, their perception of how smart they are in that goes way higher. And then people who know a medium amount, right? They start to know what they don't know, right? And it
Right.
goes down, right? And then people who become experts, it goes back up again, right? Like, because they're now experts in it. And so
Right.
what he was saying was, he was like, you got to beware of the Dunning-Kruger effect when it comes to information. That if you're getting your information from social media, if you're getting information even from people like Terrence Howard, who was a very well-spoken, articulate man, he could probably sell water to a whale. You know, you got to be careful about those things. And I think that like one of my bigger frustrations as a mental health provider is that I feel like a lot of people get their information from social media from people who aren't experts, right? From
Yes.
people who can put one and two together. So I mean, you as a provider, I'm sure you have those people that come in and they like, "My God, are you up on that mental health TikTok?" And I'd be like, "Oh God,
Yeah.
tell me
Or they're
everything."
diagnosing everybody
Yeah,
as narcissistic, or I'm like,
yeah.
you know what it actually means.
So many people come in and tell me that this person has narcissistic personality disorder. And I'm like, well, you got to really understand how all of those like access to personality disorders go, or like how many people come in and tell me I have ADHD. No, you probably don't have ADHD. Or I'm on the autism spectrum. And I go, all of us are on the
Oh,
autism
everybody is on
spectrum.
there. I was like,
The spectrum. We all fit there somewhere. you
I
know,
bet you can find a symptom somewhere if you look,
For
because it's
sure,
it's
for
so.
sure. And so when I think about like the messaging from social media, that's one of the bigger things that I caution people on that come into my office. It, Interestingly enough, it's always my recommendation that like you use social media for what social media should be used for. Is like
Yeah,
is like seeing what people's kids look like, wondering about what happened to that one dude from high school. You know what I mean?
exactly.
And then
Yeah.
figuring out what food truck is fixing to be in your neighborhood, right? Like
Okay.
you, you use it for those things. At the moment that we're actually extracting like self exploration and understanding from ourselves from social media, it becomes a slippery slope because there is no peer reviewed journal for social media. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Anybody
Right.
anybody with a 5G or a Wi-Fi connection can give you this information, and so it's really important that people are
Yeah.
are doing those things. But I also think that like there is this concept that I tell people about it. It's being an informed consumer of everything that you consume, right? I had this client that I worked with, and she totally blew my brain up one day because she was like, she deals with a lot of like depression and those types of things. And she's talking to me and we're like 15 minutes into the conversation and she's telling me about, yeah, I'm just watching what I consume. I'm watching what I consume. And so like, okay, I'm so dumb. I'm thinking she's talking about like, I'm eating right.
Yeah.
I'm ex-
I, I was like, oh, she's.
she was like, no, 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 no. The media that I consume has the exact same effect on my body as the food that I eat. And like
That's good.
I damn near
Ooh,
fell out of my chair. And I was like, I'm gonna give you your money back because you deserve I should pay you for the session today, right?
that was a
And
good one. Yeah, me
right.
too, though. Like you.
And it's the same context, right? So, I if we take emotional vulnerability out of it and we look at politics, right? You know how the algorithm work. When you like, Trump did what? Let me see what he said. Right? For that one moment that when you look up bad built blonde butch body, you know what I'm saying? Then
Yes.
for everything next, it's like shoved down your throat, right? And then
Mhm.
you start to go, my gosh, the world is going to end, our country is going to come to an end, and blah blah blah. You know what I mean? And I
Yeah.
think it works the same way. We have to be cognizant of what we're consuming when it comes to our own sense of self, our own perception, right? When we're
Yeah.
looking, one of the other things that I'm super happy is like I didn't meet my wife during the swipe right, swipe left dating world.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because now dating becomes such a passive engagement, right?
Mhm.
That most people are like, oh, wow, I matched with that person. Let me swipe. And
Yeah.
then you're looking forward to talking to that person and they never talk to you ever again. You know what I mean? You get ghosted. And so
Mhm.
once you get ghosted, what does that do to that archetype of like, see, I told you I can't trust nobody. See, I told you
Yeah.
people ain't
Yeah.
shit. They this, they're that. You know what I mean? And
Yep.
so it's all about just being cognizant of what you consume. I do recognize that it is a necessary evil that like social media is something that we do have that we need in the world. I mean, I think it's kind of like meta that like you and I are doing a podcast and we're talking about social media in this context, right? But I do recognize that like we have to have it, but it is about people being totally conscious of what they're consuming and what the impact is. Like I said, treating it the same way, right? You can't just eat hamburgers and french fries every day and expect to be skinny. It just don't work that way.
Yeah.
You can't
I
consume
tried it.
bullshit,
Trust me, it don't
right?
work.
Right? But you can't consume bullshit about masculinity, about dating, about all those things, and then expect to be healthy in your perception of your relationships in the world. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Yeah. When I first moved to California, I didn't know anybody here, so it's my family. But in Nashville, I had like friend circles, all of that kind of stuff. So I used to go out all the time. And so I remember feeling the effect of social media because that was a lot of how I accessed people I knew. But social media is not just people you know, right? Like you said, if you click on that one thing, then now you're getting a bunch of other stuff.
For
And it
sure.
made me really pay attention to, like what are you like consuming to, like how you explained it. But also what am I choosing to consume? Because like you could join groups, you can choose to follow different people. And I had to really be intentional about adjusting that at one point because I was not liking that. Every time I went on social media, it was very, very negative, very hyper opinionated. And specifically, like if you just read something about some random person's life or a celebrity or something, and then you go down the thread and you're like, wow, y'all got all of that, right? And so I remember kind of first incorporating in, and I've done this in the past, but like taking social media breaks, but also like, you know, unjoining, right? Some of those groups you in that has just a cycle of that level of just unhealthiness and maybe incorporating in some groups that are a little bit more healthy or messages that are a little bit more healthy because that's what's going to show up on your timeline. And so I don't want to go on there and just be seeing somebody drag somebody for dancing or
Hmm.
maybe getting their hair done or something because that's what it looked like.
For
I want to
sure.
see some positive messages, some encouraging things, some uplifting things, some business tips, like all of the above. And of course, I want to see my friends and family. And so I do remember that though, like social media can have an impact on you. And I didn't notice it until it was such a big, presence in my social life at that time. That was huge. Speaking of your mental health, what role would you say therapy and counseling play in men just helping men develop emotional intimacy, and what should they look for in a therapist, especially men, Black men? Like, therapy is not one size fits all, but I want to hear how how maybe you recommend this.
I mean, so I tell there's so many different aspects to it. We didn't talk about it today, but one of the things that I do is I do work with veterans, right? So I do a lot of like the evaluations and compensation and pension evaluations for veterans, and a lot of them have been through hell, like literally been through hell, and we always get through this portion of the interview where I'm taking the information from them, and I ask them, well, since you separated from the military, have you gotten mental health treatment? And all of them, well, not all of them, but the ones that are like, I know I need treatment, they get embarrassed. They're like, I know I should, but yeah, I just, and then I stop them and I have to say, you know what? I'll tell you something right now. If you're not a danger to yourself and you're not a danger to others, then I want you to think about how you're going to answer this question moving forward. And they said, why is that? I said, because mental health treatment is a different, nuanced thing, right? It's not like when you go to your medical doctor and you break your arm, and the medical doctor, they take an x-ray, they go, arm's broken, put it in a
Hmm.
cast. Take 2 of these, you'll be fine in 12 weeks, right? Mental health doesn't work that way. You're going to come in to see me, and there's not some magic voodoo that I'm fixing to do that's going to fix you, right?
Hmm.
You're going to have to do all the work. You and I are going to meet for an hour a week or whatever the paradigm is that we meet, and I'm going to talk with you. We're going to have, and there may be some action items that you get out of that, but like at the end of the day, you're going to have to internalize our conversation and find ways like, how am I applying this to my everyday life, and be conscious about how you're doing it. So if you're not ready, don't start. It's not an imminent risk situation. I want you to be ready when you start, especially when you're a person of color that probably has, as the boys says, a healthy skepticism. You know what I mean? If you have
Yeah.
you have this healthy skepticism of mental health treatment, the first thing that you're going to do is if you get pushed in and you're not ready, you're going to find someone that's not a good fit. We'll talk about that in a second, but you're going to find someone that's not a good fit. You're going to go for 3 sessions. You're going to be like, this is a waste of my money. This is a waste of my time. I'm
Mhm.
never doing it again.
Yep.
100% what you're going to
And
do.
then therapy don't work. That's
It
usually
don't
like,
work,
okay.
right? And so a lot of the people that I see in my practice, I'm super, I mean, I feel really privileged by it, but it's also something that I have to hold with really, it's a really heavy thing that weighs on me. Is like, for a lot of people that come into my practice, I'm the first person that they've ever done therapy with, ever, right? And a lot of times, because of who I am and how I practice, right? I'm not a suit and tie guy. I'm a t-shirt and jeans and some Jordans cat.
Yeah.
I'm gonna talk to you probably the same way that I talk to my homeboys at some point. My Oakland accent is gonna come out, which I didn't know I had. When they tell me when I'm in Nashville, they're like, "Oh, your Oakland accent comes out."
I do.
Right? Yeah, and so a lot of times they're like, "Oh wow, I relate to you," or "Oh wow, I feel safe, I feel comfortable," right? And so I hold that and say, okay, well, let's do that. Let's make sure that I'm getting feedback from you. What is this like? Is this good? Is this bad? Blah, blah, blah. Even when I don't see people, when people are asking me what it looks like, I tell people, like, number one, think about it like this. When you have that 15-minute consultation call, you should be interviewing that person. You're hiring that person for the most important job that you've probably hired anyone for, which is to hold your mental health. So you shouldn't
Yes.
be a passive consumer of whatever those people have to offer, right? The biggest question that I tell people to ask, and if you're a clinician that is worth the $5 that your degree is printed on, you should be able to answer this question. What is it going to be like when I'm in your office with you? What's it going to be? What can I expect? What's the expectations of me? All those other things, because this is something that's devoid of, I can sit there and list all of my credentials. I'm DBT certified. I'm
Right.
this, I'm a
All the
trauma therapist.
things nobody cares about.
Nobody even knows. What does that even mean?
Right.
It looks good. That's,
Exactly.
and I tell a lot of people that's like buying a Toyota Tercel, a shitty car, and then going to Walmart and buying all the little accoutrements, the little nice blingy things, and be
Yeah.
like, "Oh, now my car is just as good as a Ferrari." And it's like, no, it's not. No,
Yikes.
it's not, right?
Right. No.
Yeah, you're gonna wanna say, "Who are you? How do you practice? And what do you do?" Right? I tell people that they have to be able to interview a clinician in that space. And the reason why I say it's so important is because I do feel like it plays a hugely pivotal role. I actually think it's the most important role. Thinking about it like this, when we talk about emotional intimacy, as much as I do talk about it being an individualized process, it is still a process that's rooted in relationship, right? Whether even if you're not in relationship with a person in the moment, it's still a process or an idea that's rooted in relationship. So if you've had negative relationships or a series of maladaptive relationships that's actually created this poor level of intimacy or comfort or vulnerability, then the only thing that's actually going to undo this is a healthy relationship, right? And so therapy is just that. Therapy is that relationship. So it is
And for
important.
some people, it might be the only healthy
Only
relationship.
for sure,
Yep.
right? And so it's super important that you as a consumer are cognizant of that, right? Like, who is this person? Where do they come from? How do they think? Where is their degree from? How much, what is their, how much schooling have they had? All those other things go into all of these pieces. And then the other component that I tell people is it's okay to walk away, right?
Yeah.
It's okay to walk away. There's as wonderful as I want to think I am as a clinician, there has been so many people over the 15, 20 years that I've been doing this that have come into my office and been like, you know what, this isn't a good fit. And then I say, you know what?
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
And I would rather you, figure that out early than put yourself through,
Because if
trying
it
to
ain't good,
make this
yeah,
work.
if it ain't good for you, it ain't gonna be good for me neither.
It ain't gonna be good for me.
You know what I mean? But
And we always know, right? Because
For sure,
It's
for
like an
sure,
energy in your office or in your
for sure,
sessions, and you could tell when it's off. And
for
they
sure.
can too. So it's like, don't ignore that.
Yeah,
It's
but I
somebody
mean, I
that's
think
gonna make you feel fine, and you should be with that person.
yeah, I think therapy is a pivotal part of it, right? I think it's the only part or the only way of resolving some of these things? No, no, I don't think therapy
Yeah.
is for everybody. I think therapy is only for people that are ready for therapy. But I do think it is a very, very helpful tool, right? As long as there is a good connection, as long as it is, there's the one of the things that I always will, I'll never forget from grad school was, that they always talked about like what is the thing that produces the most positive outcome, positive treatment outcomes. They did all this statistical regression to figure out what was the top thing, and it wasn't who your therapist was. It wasn't where they went to school. It wasn't even the type of treatment that they do.
Yeah.
It was, do you think this person can actually help you? If you
Yes.
actually are connected with this person and you think this person can help you, it astronomically increases the likelihood of positive outcomes.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I feel like you can reach finish lines with this part of your life with certain therapists and then say, I need something different,
For
and
sure.
then may need to switch at some point. And you could be with somebody for years, you hit maybe that goal in, your recovery or healing, and then you're like, okay, I'm ready for this. And if it's really outside of my specialties or my competencies, then I will want you to be able to have
For
a
sure.
therapist you could feel successful with. Feel like you said, they're going to be able to help me.
For sure. For sure. I
Um,
agree 100%.
I love that. I think sometimes, and you talked about throughout this episode, like how just the level of trust, right, that gets challenged when men are going into an emotionally intimacy space mentally. And so it's a lot of like building that trust, building that vulnerability, breaking down some of those myths, those walls around what manhood means. Um, and being able to take that risk and try something different, explore, right, like the different layers and the spectrum of who you are, because everybody has range, and you're not just here so you can do this only, and then ignore all other parts of you. Like
For
that
sure.
leads to those holes in us, that feel those feelings of emptiness. Sometimes, like you said, that incongruence in who we are versus who we want to be or feel like we can be, and so being able to embrace all of those layers. And sometimes that's a process of rediscovery. So I really, really highly appreciate this conversation. How can people find you or contact you if they just want more or they, are interested in services?
For sure. So, I mean, I would always point everyone to my website. It's just my name, drfrankbyndloss.com. And then feel free to always send me emails, those types of things. I am licensed in specific areas. I do some telehealth stuff, but I still run a pretty small practice here in Nashville. But I do have a license to do telehealth in, I think it's like 34 other states. I also do a lot of like brief consultation type stuff too. So part of the paradigm in which I understand myself as being one of the very few Black male clinicians. I think I read something in the whatchamacallit that like 3% of licensed psychologists in
Yes.
the
In the
country,
world.
yeah,
Yeah.
are men of color, which
Right.
is
Yeah.
crazy. So because of that, I recognize I am one of very few. I do a couple of
You're like
other
this
things.
treasure.
I maybe a unicorn. I don't know about a treasure. But I do some short term, some brief consultations. I also have. I'm in the process of putting together kind of a network of clinicians, like male clinicians of color here, that I actually consult with, that I supervise. Uh, so if you can't necessarily get me, you could get my thoughts, my feelings, a surrogate of mine, or something like that. But all that would just be filtered through my website.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your expertise, so much insight and knowledge about this space that it's so foreign for many to just understand. And like you said, they may be hearing things about it, but sometimes your sources aren't as credible as you would like them to be. And so actually hearing from an expert who works with this population, who has this experience, this training, is, I think, golden and unicorn-like. To those listening, I hope that you found a lot of value in this episode. Like I said, this is one of those episodes that I feel like applies and can be beneficial to many. So feel free to share this with others. Comment, like, share. I would love to hear your feedback, because I just feel like there was so much that was said today. There was so much that was revealed today that a lot of people can relate to or maybe connect with. And so feel free to share your feedback and join again, watch other episodes of the Bianca Williams podcast, and we will see you next time. Thank you. Bye.